Hello, everybody. Welcome to Minar, the Society of Prop Managers webinar series for live theater prop professionals. I'm Sarah Harris, SPAM member and properties master at the Phoenix Theater Company in Phoenix, Arizona. I'm especially excited to speak with Nikki today because I grew up in Milwaukee and continue to work with a small company there called The Constructivists. The Society of Props Managers, formerly and affectionately known as SPAM, was formed in 1994 by a small group of prop professionals in the Midwest to address issues of common importance and to create parity with other production departments. Today, we are an association of 150 plus professional prop managers and educators from not-for-profit producing organizations, opera companies, and educational institutions. We've built an international community and support network that shares resources, information, solutions, and techniques, as well as safety information, continuing education, and stock. As with previous Spaminars, we're requesting pay what you can donations to help support this programming and our annual grants for early career prop professionals. If you can afford to donate, links to donate will be in the chat. We truly appreciate any help you can give. We have enabled live transcriptions for this webinar. If you'd like to use them, click on the live transcript button on the bottom and then select show subtitle. Alternatively, you can click view full transcript to see it in the meeting side panel. I'm joined tonight by Nikki, SPAM member and prop master at First Stage in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. In Wisconsin, she has worked as prop master or prop artisan at many theaters. Some of her favorites include Skylight Music Theatre, Milwaukee Chamber Theatre, and Renaissance Theaterworks. For 8 summers, she called Winona, Minnesota her home. There, she served as the properties director of the Great River Shakespeare Festival. Recently, she has worked with Kohl's Wild Theater at the Milwaukee County Zoo, preparing and building puppets for their in-house and touring shows. Speaking of puppets, that's what Nikki's here to talk with us about tonight. Please put any questions you may have in the chat and we'll ask them of Nikki at the end during our Q&A session. So, Nikki, I turn it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you for that intro, Sarah. So thank you so much for having me. Our first Spaminar was a puppet Spaminar 3 years ago. So it's really exciting to have another one 3 years later and we're still doing them. So I'm really excited about that. And thank you for having me again. I work for a children's theater. We do a lot of puppets, all different types of puppets. Our children's theater also does age-appropriate casting. So if the script calls for a 6-year-old, we're going to cast a 6-year-old. We're also going to double cast that 6-year-old in another cast. So a lot of the puppets that we work with are puppeteered by kids. So it's another challenge that we have sometimes, but also really, really cool to see how kids puppeteer versus adults puppeteer. So I'm just putting that out there. So some of these puppets, we try and go simpler. Some of them, we go a little bit more fantastical. It's just what we do. So the first thing I want to tell everybody is that there are so many different ways to build puppets. What I show you today is not the end all be all. I YouTube and Google things all the time to find different mechanisms, to find different materials, to find different ways to do puppets. So again, not the end all be all. There's a million different ways to do it. It's just what we have found works and is useful. So the number one thing that I like to tell puppet builders as well as puppeteers, again, working with children, is always wash your hands. When you're building a puppet, when you're about to puppeteer, when you're handling a puppet, always wash your hands. Hand sanitizer is great for getting germs off, but it does not get the nasty, sticky grossness off your hands or the oils. So the first thing I'm going to show you is what the inside of a puppet looks like after a few years of being used. Yeah, those were white at one point. That's what your hands do, whether they're completely clean or just oils on your skin. This is what happens to puppets on the inside. Those oils also break down materials over time. So that is my number one thing that I want you to know is please always wash your hands and have your puppeteers wash your hands. Yay. So the next thing, let me just do this quick. So the next thing, when you're about to do a show, you're about to do puppets, I always like to ask a couple questions first to try and figure out what we're going to do, what we need to do, what the puppet needs to do. So the first thing is always, what does it need to do? Does it need to talk? Does it need to react? Does it need to grab something throughout the scene? That's going to tell us a lot about what the puppet needs are. And then we go to how does it work? So what mechanisms do we need to do? Is it a hand puppet? Those kind of things. Followed by who is puppeteering it? Because that will also matter for the weight of the puppet. When you're doing marionettes, the height of the actor. So if we have a YP that is only 5 feet tall versus an adult who is 6 foot tall, it's going to change how we're building the puppet to begin with. Also hand size. I do not have child's hands, but a lot of times I'm building puppets for kids. So I have to keep that in mind when I'm building them because my hands are going to be larger than theirs. So things that I always start with at least. So the last Spaminar that we did, I focused more on hand puppets and materials and how to make eyes, mouth plates, those kind of things. So I'm going to stay away from those this time and give you more of a broad spectrum. These are all the different types of puppets that you can make that are out there that, you know, whatever. So it's going to be a little bit more of a free for all versus a very, very structured. This is what we're talking about. So the first thing about the types of puppets is that here at First Stage, we determine them based off of the type of manipulation or the most important manipulation. So we go by 5 different types of puppets. There are other places that do 8. There are other places that only do 4. Completely putting it out there, there are hybrids. The Muppets are like the best hybrid you can think of and the most common. But for our purposes, we base it off of 5 different types of puppets, which are hand, string, shadow, rod, and body. So it's basically just what is the most important manipulation. For hand puppets, and you're going to see all sorts of hand puppets. So this is Angry Banana Chip from Rock, Paper, Scissors. This was designed by Brandon Kirkham. You're going to hear his name a lot because he was our in-house puppet designer for many years while I've been here. So this is one of his designs that we built. So for this, all the manipulation is done with your hand. There's nothing else. There's no mechanisms. There's no rods, nothing. So that's why we would consider this a hand puppet. We also have Angry Papaya Chip here and Angry Almond. You should go see Rock, Paper, Scissors. It's pretty great. So those are what we consider more hand puppets. There's other versions of that as well. If you think Punch and Judy, the glove puppet style, where the head is here and the 2 arms are here and you're manipulating like that, it's all manipulated by your hands. We consider that a hand puppet as well. Another type of glove puppet is actually this big guy. So he literally has a glove inside of him. Because again, asking the question of what this puppet needs to do, this one needed to swim around and then grab or steal something from someone and then swim away. So we tried to make it look like it was part of the teeth in here. You can see there's some little teeth, but its legs covered up. So you can swim around with it and then grab what you need and then swim away. So it's another style of glove puppets. If you look at ones that were like pre-made ones that you can purchase, a lot of times insects are like this, so that your fingers are the legs or tentacles or whatever of an insect, and then the insect is actually on top of your wrist. So it's another style of the hand puppet. If we're going on to rod puppets, there's a whole bunch of different versions of rod puppets. Some of the most famous ones from like history, I guess, they became really popular in the United States in colleges. It gave another really cool way to do experimental theater, especially in the 60s and 70s. It also became really big with parades and protests. So if you see where you're basically holding 2 rods and then your puppet is way up here, Hair has this style puppet in it as well. That's another style of rod puppet because that's how you're manipulating it all with the rod. There might be mechanisms within there, but the rod is the main manipulation of that. So we have different types of them. I will show you Mini Bumble. This is Mini Bumble, also designed by Brandon Kirkham as part of our Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer remount show. So you're not gonna see his head, but for him, he has 2 rods that control him. And then in those rods, if you pull his skirt up, he has 2 mechanisms in here, one that controls the arms, one that controls the mouth. I guess I should point him at you. So even though you are dealing with mechanisms, it is controlled by rod. Manipulation is by rod. That's why we consider this one a rod puppet. Some smaller versions, and I'm not gonna lie, these are some of my favorite puppets to build years ago because they were super creative. We got to figure out a lot of stuff with them, which is cool. And I've never made another puppet like the centipede one that I will show you. So these are from James and the Giant Peach. These were also designed by Brandon Kirkham, with a little bit of figuring out in the shop and tweaking and stuff. But this is our centipede. So he can move around. He is controlled by rods. There's nothing else to it, rods. This is an old chain from some giant motor that I got from my dad, who is a heavy equipment mechanic. So I stole a chain from him. But it's all chain and then welded together for the legs. And then it has its rods. So this is another form of rod puppet. This one's actually really cool too. It's an inchworm. So you have the inchworm here that's attached to an outer tubing, and then there's wire that goes all the way through the tubing up to the front. So as it moves, it can inchworm across the stage. This is also James and the Giant Peach. So it's those insects that we had puppet versions first, and then the adult peppers. Another one is our ladybug, who can fly. Again, manipulated by a rod with a mechanism. I'll show some of these mechanisms in a little bit more in detail. Same thing with our little spider guy, who has wiggly legs, all controlled by rods. Where's that other guy? Oh. These were also super fun. They were for Tinkerbell. And they had to fly around the stage. They're actually manipulated by 2 people. So another question you're asking when asking the questions about the puppets before you start is how many puppeteers? So these actually had 2 people. You can manipulate them with 1, but they're all controlled by rods. So it's our little Tinkerbell. Again, Brandon Kirkham design. One other version, this is from a very long time ago. We have this little frog dude. So when he would hop, you could bounce him up on one and pinch his legs in. So it's basically a stuffed animal with rods on it is essentially what it is, but another style of rod puppet. And then we get to string puppets. So string puppets, most commonly a marionette. I will flat out say marionettes are the hardest to puppeteer. They take the most practice, they take the most finesse, and they take the most rehearsal time. And when they're done well, they are done so well. Watching an actual marionette show is amazing, just from the skill of the puppeteers. So we have a couple of those, but we also do a simplified version of that where it's still string is what's manipulating it. But this is the traditional style. They also get tangled up a lot. So the airplane is very tangled up right now. But this is your traditional style where the string controls the movement. We also, like I said, we do simplified versions of it. So this is another one where we have a stuffed animal essentially that's manipulated by strings. So we have a little dowel that they hold, really tall on this one. And then it can be on the floor running across the stage via strings. If anyone has done Edward Tulane, there is one of the dolls in Edward Tulane that kind of gets puppeteered, turned into a marionette. So we took one of our dolls that matches all of our other ones and put some strings on them that go down to the leg, and then one that supports the neck so that they can kick. So again, manipulations, all strings. We have a puppet that was built this year. It was designed by Daniel Jordan, who is our costume crafts artisan at the time, who is amazing and also has done a lot of puppet building herself and done the Stan Winston classes. So as a puppet builder, I super appreciate talking to her about the design and different materials and mechanisms that we can do. So it's really great to be able to talk about that versus just getting a picture. So this puppet for Carmela is a cat, and it was built by Eiley Robinson, who was our artisan this year. And so this is a little bit more traditional marionette because it does have a little airplane top, but it doesn't go all the way down to the bottom of the feet, it doesn't go through all the limbs. It just goes at the top for its hips, and then its back and its tail. So it gives a lot of movement, but we didn't have to teach a young performer how to really finesse marionette. And quite honestly, it looked really great on stage, and we had one YP that was nailing it. So, and then it has another rod just for the head. So when we talk about hybrids and they don't all exactly match the string rod thing, this I would consider a hybrid. It is mostly manipulated by string, but also does have the rod. Its name is Anatoly, by the way. Another version that's a hybrid that you probably know is the Muppet style. So you have a hand and rod puppet. So the wings will flap via rod, but it is a hand puppet. And this is one that we actually purchased. You can get this. And then we just did a bunch of little alterations to it, changed its eyes, changed them for things like that. So it's another option too, if you're if your shop can't handle, or you freelancing, have so much stuff to do, getting a pre-purchased one in order, or changing it or altering it is something we do all the time. All right, so those are your different style of string puppets. Shadow puppets. So we went for a while and did a lot of shadow puppets each year. And they're awesome. I think they're awesome. I think they're a perfect way to do more cinematography style art on stage live. Big battle sequences we've done, flying dragons we've done, telling old kids' tales kind of thing we've done. The thing that you might not be able to actually accomplish within budgets on stage, like having giant witches and dragons and 500 soldiers on stage, you can accomplish really well with shadow puppets. So some of the shadow puppets that we have, hold these guys down. So again, we talk about manipulation. The manipulation for these puppets is all via light and shadow. So they may have rods, they may have other things that you move with your hands, but how the audience is seeing it and how you're manipulating it is via shadows. So some of ours also, we would put weights on the back of them so that if you're moving, its head would always stay upright for this little dragon dude. And this is from Lullaby Dragon. So we have some of them that are like that, which is cool. We have some. This one is actually a test one. I'm surprised we still kept it. This was a test for the dragon. Again, Brandon Kirkham designed all the puppets for the show. And they did also have a giant 3-person puppeteered dragon as well. But we did a test on the neck for this. And this is using a very traditional style where you're using thread and threading it through all the pieces. So you have a lot of movement. These work really well, but they can tend to break pretty easily. So when we go to thicker materials, like we use a lot of chipboard, I tend to not do the threading. I tend to do like single holes and connecting them just because I think they last longer and they hold up better, especially if you're backstage doing a whole bunch of this and then have to drop it and go on to the next scene. But this is also a very traditional way to do this, which is really cool. And then you would just have a rod on the head that you would move the head around and the neck would go with. If you want to go bigger, we didn't have a person standing backstage, so we had this guy backstage doing stuff. So again, you have a rod, but it's all done with shadows. And those are the joints. Another thing with shadow puppets, and I'll be the first to tell you, I do not understand color mixing and light theory. I understand pigments, so color mixing, not my thing. However, you can totally do color with shadow puppets, and I think it's a really, really cool thing, and it really focuses the audience's eyes as well to see color versus just a normal shadow. So this is just printed off from a regular printer computer onto, I think this was all onto acetates or something. James and the Giant Peach, there's your peach, but it does give that color, which is really cool. So we have that. Body puppets. So we have a bunch of large body puppets. I can't move them by myself, so I did not get to bring them in here. But I do have some images that I can share with you. I know when this was announced, people asked about our Bumble, our giant Bumble that is about 10 feet tall. It's operated by 3 puppeteers. Someone is inside of it. And when we talk about manipulation, your entire body is manipulating that puppet. Even if you're just on the side, your entire body is manipulating it, whether it's a backpack style or you just literally need your entire body to move around things. Think Warhorse, think King Kong. Those are also some animatronics in there, but there are large body puppets. So let me just show you our Bumble. All the puppets. So we're videoing. You're going to hear me talking here. So this is our giant Bumble with 1 person inside of it right now. 2 people also work the arms when it's in production, but this is our artistic director inside of there testing it out for some filming. But this is our giant Bumble, which was the body puppet. Now, we also have, I said Lullaby Dragon, and then we had a large dragon as well. This is the Lullaby Dragon puppet. It was also puppeteered by 3 people. It was also designed by Brandon Kirkham. Again, in-house puppet designer is amazing to have. So for this one, someone was actually up inside of the stomach and had a backpack style harness on him. And then someone would puppeteer the face and someone would puppeteer the tail. So you can see kind of up inside of there is a place for the backpack style to go on. It's also hanging in the costume shop. It's not even here right now. So that is Lullaby Dragon. I don't know if I would totally consider the hippo a body puppet or a rod puppet, but during COVID, I was building this hippo. That's the test piece for it. That we sent to rehearsal to see if it'll work or not. And then it was all carved out of, it was all carved out of foam and then covered. There's hammer cops in the middle of there. But it ended up looking like this. So its mouth opened up so you could see inside that you could like have someone put their head inside. It is built onto a stroller, basically, so it can roll around. Another question when we talk about what does this puppet need to do, this one needed to go off-roading at the zoo. So that's why we went with stroller kind of wheels on there. Another thing I learned working at the zoo and puppets being outside, don't use hot glue on a puppet that is going to sit outside in the sun for a very long time. So again, just things to think about as you're working on figuring out how to build your puppet. Oh, that's the inside. I'll show you the inside. That's the inside of its mouth. So the whole mouth opened up. And I really tried to find pictures of the inside of Bumble. I really tried, but we don't have a ton of them. So this is from this summer when we basically skinned it so we could do some extra work on it. But this is our giant Bumble. The structure itself is really only its chest up. The bottom is all just loose fur, basically. Let me see. You can see inside of here, it's a lot of aluminum. All of the weight is above the puppeteer's shoulders. So trying to make it as lightweight as possible using aluminum banding or aluminum pipe. or aluminum tube to do the structure in there, and then really only focusing on the main structure that needs to be there, and then filling everything else out with foam to keep it as light as possible. Bumble's not super heavy, but on your shoulders for a whole performance, it very much can be. You can see in this one, he's leaning against the table, but towards the ground, that's actually the harness that the actor is in. It goes on kind of over his shoulders. Think of like a big bass from a marching band, that style of harness that goes over. There's also football padding in there to make it a little bit more comfortable for him. And then it straps around his waist and kind of, he gets strapped into it. So him walking around, the Bumble head and shoulders are directly above him. He's actually looking out the chest piece. And that's the next thing. Oh, and just for all of your pleasure, there is where Bumble currently is right now. He is covered in plastic in storage, but that is what he looks like on his rack. Now, as far as how Bumble works, so Bumble actually has, I said his structure, in front of that, attached to the head that comes down, is a bicycle handle. So let's show this right away. So right in front of the actor, there is basically this bicycle handle that has a pipe that goes straight up and back and up to the head. So as the puppeteer is walking around, the Bumble's weight is on his shoulders, and then he can turn the Bumble's head this way. And then on each on each side of these, there is a bicycle brake. And that brake controls on one side the mouth opening and closing, and the other side the eyes going back and forth. So Bumble can get really, really animated really, really quickly, especially since we've had the same person playing Bumble for years now, and he is amazing. But he can sit and bounce in it, and like the whole Bumble's bounce, and you can move him around and you can get it really animated. It's really awesome to see, actually. Bumble's pretty great, I'm just saying. All right, so those are the different types of styles of puppets, at least what we base on here at First Stage. So I want to get that out of the way and also show you some different versions of that before I talk about anything else. So kind of talking about materials a little bit. I had mentioned the last Spaminar, I talked a little bit more about materials for hand puppets and different foams and things. So like open cell foams, upholstery foams. We use a product called Dry Fast. It's very open cell foam. And it also literally dries fast. So if you have sweaty hands, it helps out, or if your puppet is getting wet, it helps out a lot. But then you also have the denser foams. So like EVAs, L200s. If you have the kids interlocking, like little play mats, those are awesome. I know cosplayers use them. I will also say thank you, cosplayers, because beforehand I would have to custom order all this stuff. And now because of y'all, I can find it at Joann's, which is super amazing to be able to find that locally now and not have to custom order for some stuff. And it's literally all to cosplayers. So another material when you're working with more bigger puppets or puppets that aren't necessarily the Muppet style puppets is aluminum. You saw it in Bumble doing aluminum strips or aluminum tubing. Works really well for keeping weight down. That is actually the inside of mini Bumble over here. These are aluminum tubes to keep him lightweight when he's vertical and someone has to hold him up for a while. So super easy to do. And the thing I like about it is you don't have to weld it. I know that's like a big fear of everyone's, is like aluminum welding, because it's kind of a pain in the butt sometimes, and not everyone has the right spool gun for it and all of those things. You can rivet it, you can through bolt it. It's bendable, like it works out really, really well for a lot of puppet needs. The other thing you can do is fiberglass. So if you have fiberglass rods, we'll do a lot of that, of like having a butterfly on top of a fiberglass rod and wiggling it around. So it gives it movement and play. We've also done piano wire for that as well. But fiberglass works really well as rods, tubings, extra little structures in there, works super well. Other side of that, the original Bumble from the original version was a fiberglass head. So it was basically a shell, which is another way to cut down materials. My opinion, it's still heavier than what we need as far as working with YPs, having someone in it for an entire show. It still can be kind of heavy, but again, it's the need of your puppet and the need of your production. So that might be another option for you. Another thing is different plastics. So there's thermoplastics out there. There's things like Wonderflex, there's Warbla, there's Fa-Shape. There's a whole bunch of plastic infused different things out there that are more lightweight. And quite honestly, just play with them. That's all I do. I play with them and see what they can do and how far they can go and test their limits on, yeah, can't get that hot there, like that kind of thing. I play with them a lot, but I think they're a really great option for keeping weight down as well. Another plastic that you can use that we were able to do with our 2-lane puppets, which I will show you, which again, they're not really puppets, they're more dolls, but it's something that's universally like can be used for puppets. So our 2-lane puppet, we ended up having to sculpt it out of clay. And then we did a brush on mold with a plaster mother mold on it. So this is the mold of its head, basically, and its head looks like this. But what we were able to do, which is really cool and kept down weight, but still kept up strength, was do a slip cast with smooth on smooth cast liquid plastic. So you could pour it in here, and it's got like a 90-second pot life. And then it starts going from clear to white real quick. But we were able to pour it in here and just keep it rotating, keeping it moving, and do a slip cast of it. So our heads are all completely hollow. And then we backed them with a 2-part expanding foam. It's from Home Depot, the post foam that you can do instead of doing concrete. So you pour the 2 in and it mixes it up. That's what we used for this, because at the time, great stuff wasn't going to be an option for us, and we didn't have other 2-part expanding foams. So another thing of just finding something local, finding something that might work. But it really did, it backed them really well. And then we were able to put the shaft inside that went into the body. So that's another way you can use plastics to do heads. So if you are doing, a rod puppet style or something like that, you're not doing a soft foam or fabric version, you can do this kind of plastic version, which works out really, really well. Another thing is just wires. Wires will go a really long way. Talking specifically about our 2-lane, what we did was we put the ears in with wire, just wire frame the ears, and then did this guy, and then did fabric ears that slide over and glue on, so that we could take them off if we ever needed to, or we need to clean them. They've gone out on rentals. We've had to be able to take them apart a little bit, but you're also able to move them and manipulate them. And the reason I bring this up is because this also works really well for posing arms, posing hands. I have an alien puppet that I'm actually going to show you next, that we ended up putting a lot of wire within there, just to be able to give it a little bit more life versus just hanging flat. So that's another way we did. One thing I will say about this smooth cast, they tried to do some shadow play with it and got real hot, and this stuff does melt. So keep that in mind. We did not know that at the time, but that's what it'll do. Along with the wire, I like to protect our wire if possible and protect our puppet by putting tube around it. So vinyl tubing, plastic tubing, something like that, so that the wire itself that is smaller is not rubbing or causing wear and tear. It's within the tube. So you can still, bend it, manipulate it, pose it as needed. But yeah, this is a vinyl tube and then this is a plastic tube. So we tend to do that, especially like within the legs, just so we're not having a lot of wear and tear and rubbing. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about mechanisms. So this is the part where I'm just going to tell you a whole bunch of things that I messed up or made mistakes on in the past, and what we learned from them. So when it comes to mechanisms, like I said, the Muppet style hand, mouth, plate thing I talked about in the last Spaminar, so I'm going to kind of just skip over that. But when it comes to different like rod mechanisms, one great thing is the pull ring. So I showed you this guy a little while ago. Basically, you have the point where your wire or string or whatever is attached to that's going to pull. And then your ring just pulls as far as you are pulling, basically. It'll go up as far as your finger is pulling. I like and hate these, sorry. I like these because they're low profile. You can fit them into a puppet a lot easier. They're super simple. You can do fishing line, you can do wire, you can do pencil rod, you can do just regular string on these. The thing that I'm not super excited about them is that you tend to have to guide the wires, or the string or whatever. So they're attached here. They go through this little eye bolt and then pull down to another eye bolt. Well, there's a lot of places in there for string or wire or whatever to rub and either fray or basically cause damage or cause a channel in there. Like there's just a lot of failure points, as I'll put it. With something like this where it's wide open, yeah, you can fix that really quick. But if it's something that is up inside of a puppet, it takes a little bit more. Not gonna lie, Kohl's Wild Theater, a lot of the puppets that I repair they were pull strings like this, and we're switching them out to bike brakes or something else, or reinforcing or putting like a tube inside of here that the string can run along. But this is that pull string style, which is, again, super simple and low profile, but has its issues as well. What's on my list? Okay, PVC hinge. I don't have one to show you specifically. However, YouTube it, it's really cool. So the main thing about a puppet mechanism, this is really broad. You need a hinge and a spring. And I don't mean that literally like a literal hinge or a literal spring. It just needs to be able to do those things. So when you're talking about hand puppet, your hand is the hinge and spring, or there's a hinge in the mouth plate and your hand is the spring. When it comes to rod puppets like this, my finger is essentially the hinge, but something has to spring this back. So I'm pulling, and yes, there are hinges up here, but something has to pull it back. And that would be the spring portion of it. So in this one, we actually have weights back here to pull it back. Something like this little grasshopper, same thing. You pull it and the legs go out, but there are springs in here to pull it back. So you have different Chicago screws and stuff in here, which are your hinges. And then you need springs to pull it back. So when I talk about this PVC thing, it works as the hinge and the spring, which is super cool. It is inside of this parrot. So this parrot is meant to be attached to a piece of furniture. This one was designed by Brandon Kirkham and built by Melissa Hunter, who is an artisan here. And that's the style that its mouth is. So it has its mouth plate like normal, and on the back of that plate is a piece of cut PVC. So you can pull it down and it stretches up, but the PVC pinches it back together. So it's a really cool mechanism. It's really finicky. It took us a little while to figure out the different types of PVC and how much reinforcing and stuff. But if you need a really low profile, it works out really well because it's all encompassed in one. This guy's pretty cool. This guy also, so then the next thing will be the bike brake. So this one does have the bike brake. It's not attached because it has to go inside of its thing. But the thing that I love about the bike brake is that there are less failure points. So I said our Bumble has bike brakes that go up. So there's less failure points because it's essentially within a tube the entire way. And you don't have to have all those eye screws or eye bolts throughout everything. And then you can, because this is a cable, you can do Nyko press, you can do Crosby's, you can do that kind of thing where it has to grab on and hook around. So it can be a really, really secure connection. The only thing is that it does small movements. So whatever this distance is the amount of movement you will get. So it works really well on mouth stuff or small eye things. You can also kind of do like, essentially like gearing it up. So this might have small movement, but somewhere within your mechanism, it changes to make it have more movement. But it is something you need to figure out. But these are pretty straightforward. They're super easy. There's a lot less failure points on them, and they're really strong. So that is one that I suggest all the time, or switch out to have those. Sweet marionette. We kind of talked about the strings for marionettes. The other thing I wanted to talk about, because I mentioned it, Chicago screws. So if you're going to do a marionette, like that cat is done basically with a flat piece, this is hardboard, but flat piece of meso or luan, but it needs a joint in it. So this is Chicago screw. I have heard it called other things. I am not positive. I just know them as Chicago screws. So they basically have a threaded shaft that has the end on it, and it just screws in. And it comes in all different lengths. It also comes in aluminum. I will say though, if you use aluminum, the threads tend to kind of get caught the first time you put it in. So it's permanent at that point. But there's different sizes and stuff. But what's great about this is that shaft allows this to move around without moving it versus just through bolting and having to leave just like a little bit of play in there so that the stuff can move around it, or having to put a bearing in or those kind of things. That's why I really like Chicago screws. We do these with shadow puppets. We do them with anything flat. When it comes to that cat marionette, so this is the structure of all the limbs so that you have joints like you would have joints on yourself. But then this gets filled out with foam. So it's not just flat. The other way to do that, I love these. So you basically just do a joint like that and drill a hole through both of them, put a wire in there, put a Chicago screw in there, put whatever, and then you have this type of joint. So the picture in the beginning with the hammercop birds, that's how their legs are, so that their legs can dangle. And then when they rest on the ground, they can bend like the bird's normal legs would. So these would just kind of rest down and bend. And then I built up around there with epoxy sculpt so that it kind of gave it a natural stop where it couldn't overbend. But this is another really good little fitting there. The other thing, use something that already exists. I say that as we've used these before, little grabbers, all different types of grabbers out there. They work kind of the same way as the bike brakes, but something that already exists is great. Another one we have done is, so this parrot, its wings do go back and forth. It's hard to do without it being on, but they come out and go back in. That's an umbrella. We pulled apart an umbrella and used an umbrella for that. So that how an umbrella would naturally come out, that's how the wings are sideways. So they'll come out. Another thing we've done with umbrellas, this is recent from Hobbit. These were spiders. So they're a reverse umbrella, the upside down style, that we cut up and they could slink around and be spiders. Our artistic director came up with this and like R&D'd it and loved it. And so we went with it. But this is another really cool way to use something that already exists. For that parrot, we basically just cut off a couple pieces of these and used those within the structure. All right. Got a little bit of time left, so I'm going to talk about patterning. I think it's something I mentioned in the last Spaminar, but never really went into detail. However, we did one this year, so I want to show you a way to do that. So this puppet was designed by Arnold Bueso, and then we built it this past summer. But it is it's a puppet that needed to be an alien. And I don't know about you, I can't just look at this and figure out what the flat pattern is going to be for it. So this is one where sculpted out of clay. And this is monster clay. I love monster clay. You can use plasticine. I'm not a huge fan of the smell of it, but I love monster clay, and we can reuse this. We just need to heat it up and pull it off. But then cover it in masking tape and then cut off the masking tape in sections, which you can still see my cut lines. I hope you can see my cut lines on here of how I cut the pattern off. And then you trim the pattern, adding darts in it to make it as flat as possible to stick back onto a piece of paper. So the back of the head, all the different mouthpieces, the back of the eyeballs. So that gives you all your darts to make those curves, especially in foam, and the eyepieces as well. So I like doing this. I like putting them on here because then I can scan them in and I can make them bigger. I can scale them however I want. I can clean them up. I can just print it off and test it out in paper to see if it's coming back together right. This is one of my favorite ways to do this versus just winging it and going for it. So that's his head. And then I'm a huge fan of doing mock-ups. I will keep all scrap foam lying around just to test out. So this is the first version of putting it all back together. It's too big. It was definitely too big, but I kept going with it because I wanted to make sure the pattern worked. So you can see all those places where we have cuts and stuff. And then there's also places where we discovered, yeah, this isn't fitting well. So let's try and like rework this. Also, the fact that the foam is thicker than paper or masking tape, that's a big thing as well. So I always do a mock-up. And then you get to the final one. Oh, let's get out of here. So this was for Arthur and Friends, Arthur the Aardvark, not the king. So this is our puppet. This one's mouth didn't have to move at all. Its eyes did. So this part and this part are all L200, more of like EVA dense foam to keep its structure. But up here, it's more of a dry fast, like more of an upholstery foam, open cell foam, so that it can have a lot of movement in it. And then we talked about putting wires in so we can make them posable. So he could curl his hand, be posable. There is some posability in his arms. There's also some posability in his legs, so they weren't just hanging down. Not super necessary, but I think it adds a little extra to have his legs curve a bit when he like lands. So he had to dance during the show. So, but this is a way to go from kind of figuring it out all the way to the puppet, doing the masking tape and the sculpting and stuff. That's your flat patterning. I also will do building up. So I'll do a structure and then add foam onto it and try and like carve it out, which works fine if you're doing a single one. If you're doing multiples, figuring out some way to cut that apart so that you can make a pattern off of it. For like our alien dude, I couldn't really do that because I needed the inside to be completely hollow and I needed the inside of the eyes to be completely hollow. So I couldn't just build them up and attach them on. So that's another way to do that. I talked about having the denser foam for certain parts to keep the structure there, so it's not going flat. Some other things you can use, ridgeline, boning. I tend to like to use the 1/2-inch foam because it already kind of adds that to it. But another way that you can do it, you can also stuff it with polyfill or whatever you need to do. Again, it's whatever your puppet needs. Reinforce wherever possible. Anywhere you can reinforce. Again, I work with young performers, so we reinforce as much as possible on everything. The other thing we do is try and add snaps or Velcro into a puppet so that we can basically open it up and get inside of it. Sometimes puppets break, it happens. It's no one's fault sometimes, just wear and tear, but the ability to get inside of a puppet and do any alterations or any fixes if run crew needs to get in. So at any point, if you can add snaps or Velcro, the back of this cat actually has Velcro all the way down the side that you can pull open. So you can get to the entire back and change out any strings or anything that you need. Let's see. I said I would say this in the spiel about the thing. So fur, if you are going to stitch fur, whether it's hand stitching or machine stitching, whatever, masking tape the side of the fur. So once you cut it, push it all to the side, throw some painter's tape, masking tape on it, and keep it out of the way, essentially. So if you're draping it, then you have your pieces right there that you can access the backing and just stitch. And it gives you a lot cleaner because all the fur will flop back over and cover the seam. So it makes it a little bit cleaner. If you're going to do it on a machine, that's fine. I've heard people say don't stitch fur on a machine. I think you can, whatever. Just make sure that that tape is far enough away from your seam allowance so that when you put them together, you're not stitching through the tape, but it keeps all of it out of the way. That's also a Stan Winston thing, by the way, is that tape. Like I said, I Google or YouTube stuff. I don't magically come up with all of this. And then the other thing I've heard about fur specifically, people say that you have to cut it with a knife or an X-Acto blade. I don't think you have to. I get where they're coming from, but I think if you go, if you're looking at the back and you basically just put your scissors where it's right, just right on the backing, you can basically see your scissors through the backing and you've cut that way. So you're basically having all the fur below the scissors. I'm trying to show you this really well. I think it works fine. There's always going to be a little bit of fur that comes off, but even cutting that, there's not a lot coming off versus if you just cut it straight across all the fur, and then you have a lot. So if you're doing just this and you just cut it and now all of a sudden you have all of this fur that's coming off, don't do that. Do it from the back and try and cut through. Now I'm gonna have fur in my shop for a while. It's gonna be great. We talked about in the last one, ladder stitches and Henson stitches. Check that other YouTube or the other video out. These are my favorite stitches ever when it comes to puppets, is ladder and Henson stitches, better than whip stitching kind of thing. One other hint is if you have a movable neck, don't stitch the neck fur to the body. It hinders its movement. It also will leave a weird spot here that will stay when it's trying to move and it just looks kind of funny. So I'm trying to get Moonracer over here a little bit. Moonracer, here's your wing. So his neck is not attached, his neck fur is not attached to this bottom part, so that when he goes up and down, it's not pinching. Like if we had it right here, he couldn't go further and it would be weird going across. Same thing with this part as well. We leave it loose, so that gives it more movement. Hi, Moonracer. He's my favorite puppet in Rudy. But let's see, I said stitch as much as possible when you're doing fabric stuff versus glue, and through bolt or screw as much as possible versus glue, just for longevity of your puppet. We do 10 shows a week with our shows, so for over a month, so they get a lot of wear and tear in them. And make sure you add details. Our angry dudes, they have a lot of little extra details, like under eyelids, seeds on here. We use a lot of Sharpies or alcohol inks for that as well to tone them so it doesn't come off. Actually, we still have our little set of samples for all of our different Sharpies on fleeces, just so we can add those extra details. So I think that's everything that I wanted to say on my little list that you all saw me looking at. So I think we can go to Q&A. I can also mention a couple of resources if anyone wants any, but I kind of want to know what you guys are all thinking about because I've not been watching the chat. Sorry.
All righty. So yeah, if you have any questions you want to ask, just put them in the chat. We're going to start with Jim Guy wants to know how you got into this. Did you learn on the job or did you have prior experience / study?
Oh, Jim. So I did not do a lot of puppet stuff before coming here. I did a little bit, wasn't crazy about it or anything. But working in a children's theater will crash course you. Because again, pretty much all of the puppets I showed you have been built since I've been here, whether myself or an artisan at the time. The other thing is having Brandon Kirkham here was amazing because he's an amazing puppet builder. His puppets are gorgeous. He's lovely. He's also on tour with Lion King right now, working on their puppets. So he was really great to have, and I used him as a resource a lot and just kind of crash course learned it all. And I'm really happy that I can now tell you all of the mistakes that I made that you hopefully won't do because I figured it out.
Awesome. And then sort of, I think, playing off of that, Nato, sorry if I'm pronouncing it incorrectly, wants to know, do you have any advice for how to get into puppet making? It's a long-term goal of theirs to do it professionally, but it's hard to imagine getting into the job if you've never made a puppet before.
Absolutely. My thing is look on YouTube, look on Google, search stuff, play around. I learned a lot of stuff just being like, oh, this is the wrong adhesive for this foam, or hey, this works out way better than when I did it last time. Doing a lot of those ring mechanism stuff, I realized like, if I can fit a bike brake in, I'm going to put a bike brake in. But it's all stuff I kind of learned along the way. But my biggest thing is just try it out, play it, build a puppet for yourself. Like go home and just build a puppet and test out and see what you can do. I said I would mention resources. I have my little list. Puppetbuildingworld.com is a great intro source for a lot of stuff. Puppetpelts.com also has a little resource center that has like 4 or 5 different places it can send you to. If you got the money to put towards it, the Stan Winston School of Character Arts. I know the classes aren't cheap, but they are so amazing. There's a lot of information in there. There are decades and decades of experienced people that are showing you all of these things. There's also the University of Connecticut that has a puppet program. That is what Brandon Kirkham did. He did the online course. So you can do that again if you're willing to throw a little bit of money at it. There's puppetproject.com. That's another great like starting resource. There is a person you should look up that is called Jimmy Grimes. He's out of the UK. He has a book that I've been trying to get, but it's like small batch printing, but it's called Puppet Mechanisms and How They Work. He also has some videos on his website that the style and type of puppets that he does is beautiful. You see all the mechanisms, you see the interiors of everything, you see how everything moves. It's just like really beautiful to watch, to see. But I think that's a really good one for beginning puppet people too. And then this book, I just got to reach to grab it. If you can find it in print, buy it. I can't find it in print, so I have a copy from someone. The Rod Puppet and Tabletop Puppets, I'm going to say is their name wrong. It's Hans-Jürgen Fedig, I think. Sorry, I'm so sorry if someone else knows how to say that. This is a really great book. It shows you all different, more complicated interiors of puppets. We tend to go as simple as possible, but this is another really great resource just to have and read. But yeah, that's my biggest thing is like, check out these places and then just try it. Just build your own. Or ask people that know. I don't know.
Awesome. All right. Let's see. Richard wants to know, during a show run, how much time is spent on puppet repair? And is there a dedicated person backstage that does this?
My goal is 0. I legit try and build every puppet to be reinforced, to be as strong as possible. We test them out throughout rehearsal. The way we do our rehearsals is all final props and puppets are in rehearsal for first rehearsal. So they're doing all of rehearsal with them. That's where we're finding out if there's issues or if we have weak points, essentially. So my goal is that they do not break during the run. Has it happened? Absolutely. Not super common. I would say rock, paper, scissors, there wasn't anything that happened. Carmela with a string puppet, and string puppets have the tendency to be the issue ones. That one never broke. So like, I'm jinxing it now. That is my goal. As far as someone backstage, no, we do not have a dedicated props or puppet person. We have our two IA run crew. We work in an IA house. We have our two IA run crew that will try and fix things during shows or in between shows. But a lot of times if it's a major repair, like Rudy has 32 puppets or 32 puppeteered things in it. So the likelihood of one of those going down or having a pop seam or something like that is more likely. And if it's possible, then they'll bring me in to fix it, or they will try and do a quick fix there. And then I will go in and do like a major repair. Bumble's mouth broke this year. So I had to go in and do that major repair and cut his back of his head open. But yeah, there's no one specific that we have really besides myself.
Okay. There was sort of a question earlier in the webinar that Tia said that they've heard that marionettes are super hard to make, something about creating equal weight in the feet. Do you know anything about that?
That is very true, especially if you are doing traditional ones that go all the way down to the feet and like run through the kneecap, essentially. Everything has to be weighted so that like essentially holding your finger on the top of the airplane piece, everything lays perfectly straight if you're doing this, so that any tiny little movement causes a bigger movement down there. So yes, they are one of the harder ones to do. That is another reason why we try to not do traditional marionettes, along with it being a lot harder to do puppeteering wise. That's why we tend to do like what that cat was, where it's more hip and movement versus going all the way down and trying to make sure every single limb lines up and is weighted correctly. But yeah, you're right. Marionettes are the hardest all around.
All right. Overkill Props NYC says, you mentioned during the alien pattern making that something was coming together weird in your oversized test. They think maybe it was the mouth. How did you resolve that?
Oh, the reason I do it in foam is that I can literally just cut it off and then cut the seams all back open and scan that in as the new pattern, essentially, at that size, and then reduce it to whatever I need to based off everything else. But the way this was coming together, it's cut at this point, but you can kind of see there, it's not straight, that it kind of waves up and down. And that's just how it came out. It could be my pattern wasn't that great. It could be my line wasn't cut great. It could be when I cut the paper version of it. It could be the fact that this foam is thicker. But yeah, it's this mouthpiece here. So what I ended up doing to solve it was I gave up on this, and I went online and I found a pattern for a Victrola horn, and I patterned it out via a Victrola horn, and then cut that. I think somewhere around here I have that, but yeah, that's why I do the mock-ups and why I do them in foam versus trying to do them in paper.
Okay, Shanika says, with so many options on how to approach building any given puppet, how do you decide at the beginning which way to go about it?
It's basically those questions I've been mentioning throughout of like, if I know, so they wanted a squid for a show called Escape from Paligra Island. We did a virtual version. We're doing a version next year. It is a choose your own adventure. So it's 4 shows in one, but they wanted a squid puppet. And so within that is like, okay, well, what does the squid need to do? And how do we do that? So like, what does it need to do? Oh, it just needs to grab this thing and then float away. Okay, cool. So how do we want to do that? Like this could have easily been something on a rod, that we could have had like a pull mechanism for something that opened up and got slipped in, but they wanted it to be really fast. And so that's what I was like, okay, so you essentially want something to grab, like a hand to grab and then go away. So how do we incorporate the hand, like your physical hand into this? Well, in my brain, the easiest way to do that would be to do this. Also, because I already had this pattern, I made giant versions of these for my nieces when they were younger. So I literally already had this pattern and went, great, I'll size this down. I already have a squid. I know I can make the hand go in the bottom. They can grab the thing and it'll be super lightweight. And then also because we're doing it virtually and it's a really fast paced thing, once they were done with it, they could basically toss it and it wouldn't get damaged because it's all soft. So it's kind of that like breaking down every single possibility and then going from there.
Okay. Vivi wants to know, is there any CAD or hand drafting work for mechanical design, or is it all done with a mixture of trial and error? And also, how long does a puppet build typically take?
Oh, okay. So number one, I am not the greatest at CAD drafting. We just got a 3D printer and a CNC carve and a laser, and I'm figuring that all out now. So I'm not great at drafting in that way. So the way my brain works is to sculpt or work with the material right away. However, pretty much the only puppet I didn't show you guys is awesome because this comes up. So another Brandon Kirkham design show. I said Tinkerbell. You saw the little Tinkerbell. He also did, we did some puppets that were 2 ducks and a giant crocodile. And all of the innards were visible. And so because of that, and all of the figuring out and how things go together and like tweaking, I asked Brandon, can you do a SketchUp? Because he does SketchUp. I was like, can you do this in SketchUp so we can kind of see what this really is? Because of that, he made it in SketchUp, the whole puppet. I'm sorry, I can't bring the crocodile down because it's really big and it's on a top shelf, but I'll show you the duck. But he was able to then give us the patterns because it was in SketchUp. He could put it into layout and give us all of the patterns in the size, cut it all out because it was all cut out of 3/4 ply. And this is what our duck. He is not the lightest, but he rolls, so it's okay. So you can see all of these pieces that we would have had to try and figure out or get together, and it would have kind of been a pain in the butt. All of these, because there was a digital drafting of it, we could just print them off and cut them out, which is great. A lot of the holes in here because of weight. Again, this is a lot of 3/4 ply. It's not light, but it does roll on the ground with its weird little duck flippers. So we didn't have to worry about weight as much. And then, like I said, you can see all of the inside. So all of those inner pieces also we got the drafting for. So we could just cut everything out and put it together. So there is a world where drafting is a thing in puppetry. I have not experienced it as much, but that is something that was so invaluable for us, is to have that drafting. Was that all the questions for that one?
Let's see here. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, and I think they were asking what a typical time is on a puppet, but that probably varies a lot, right?
This dude was when I was by myself in the shop. So I was bouncing around a lot, but it was 3 weeks, but I probably only worked on it for like a week and a half straight. And that's with all the patterning, that's with all the pieces, that's with testing it, that's with mock-ups, that's with hand stitching it all. I also tend to drape onto a puppet and hand stitch it. I don't tend to do patterns and then adding it unless I'm doing multiples. So that is another reason why it takes me a little bit longer. This guy, because I'd already done the pattern before, this took me like 2 days to do all of this. Rod puppets go by pretty easy. I think the cat, because it was also Eileen's first time doing that style puppet, I think it was like 2.5 weeks of work to get it all together and all the inner pieces and movement and all of that. So they're kind of all vary.
Okay, I think maybe we have time for one more question. Is there a puppet you've always wanted to build, or do you have a favorite character or animal?
Oh my gosh. No, there is not a puppet that I have always wanted to build. I thought it would always be cool to do like a warhorse, like big body puppet kind of thing. Most of our big body puppets were built by Brandon, designed and built by Brandon. So it'd be cool to do a really big body puppet like that. But there's not like a specific one. As far as characters go, like you've seen the gambit of what we do. We do all sorts of weird, different, crazy things. Like it's always fun and exciting no matter what puppet we're going to do. Like we're already talking about the puppets for next year, and those are going to be cool too. So
awesome. Is there any last words of advice you want to say before we say goodbye here?
I would say just do it. Nike that. Just do it, try it, try out different things, try out different materials. If you have a local source for something that like we don't have in Milwaukee, I probably don't know about it. Try it out, see what happens. The other thing I would say is I'm not sure if there's more questions in there, but if you have any questions, you can always comment on this YouTube video when it finally goes up, or on the Facebook page or on the Facebook group as well. And I will try and answer any other additional questions. That's what I got. Thank you so much. I love this. My puppet world.
Thank you, Nikki. All right. Thank you so much for a fun and informative evening. And now it's time to get out your Sharpies and mark your calendars for our next Spaminar on June 18th. SPAM's Anti-Oppression Committee will be presenting Increasing Your Shelf Life, Physical Safety in Props. They've been gathering information on how we work in different departments, and we'll be sharing that with us, along with suggestions on how we might be able to improve and adjust some of our work processes to prolong our time in the field of props. If you're interested in joining SPAM and are a working prop manager in a nonprofit theater, opera company, or children's theater, or are an educator who teaches prop classes, please visit our website or click the link in the chat to fill out our membership form. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. Links are also in the chat. Spaminar is produced by the Society of Props Managers with special thanks to SPAM members Patrick Drone, Freed, Larry Heyman, Ben Homan, Stacy Horn Harper, Nikki Kulas, Jen McClure, Amy Peter, Sarah Pugh, Karen Robbie Vance, and Helen Stratakis. Thanks again for watching. And once again, please keep your suggestions for future Spaminars coming. We want to know what you want to learn about. So prop on, and we'll see you next time.